My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm telling you this story because it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It was a Tuesday morning in October when the letter arrived. The kind of crisp autumn day where the leaves crunch under your feet and the air smells like promises of winter. I was rushing to get the kids ready for school when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a postal worker holding an official-looking envelope, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even know what's inside. "Sarah Chen," he asked, checking his clipboard twice. "That's me. This got held up in our system for quite a while. Sorry about that." He handed me the envelope with an apologetic smile. The envelope was yellowed around the edges, and the postmark made my breath catch. October 15, 1994. 30 years ago, almost to the day. My hands trembled as I read the return address. Margaret Sullivan, 1247 Maple Street, Portland, Oregon. I'd never heard that name in my life. The kids were calling from the kitchen asking where their lunch boxes were, but I couldn't move. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, like it contained more than just paper and ink. Like it contained secrets that had been waiting 3 decades to surface. "Mom," my daughter Emma called out. "We're going to be late." I slipped the letter into my purse, got the kids off to school, and drove to work in a daze. All day that envelope burned in my bag like a live coal. During lunch, I found myself staring at it in the parking lot, afraid to open it but unable to throw it away. That evening, after dinner and homework and bedtime stories, I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea and finally opened the letter that had been traveling through time to find me. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the kind you see from someone who wants every word to be perfectly clear. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then you're old enough to know the truth about who you really are, and I'm probably gone. I've been your grandmother for 5 years now, though you've never known it. Your parents, the ones who raised you, they love you more than life itself, but there are things about your beginning that they were asked to keep secret." My tea went cold as I read those words again and again. Grandmother? The Chens were my parents. I was born in San Francisco. I had their hospital bracelet in my baby book, their signatures on my birth certificate. But as I kept reading, Margaret Sullivan's words began to paint a picture that made terrible, impossible sense of things I'd always wondered about but never dared to question. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, reading and rereading Margaret's letter until I had every word memorized. By morning, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. The letter explained that my biological mother, Margaret's daughter Claire, had been just 17 when she got pregnant. This was 1989, and Claire was supposed to start college in the fall. The family made the heartbreaking decision that Claire would give birth in secret, and the baby Amy would be placed with a loving family who desperately wanted a child. That family was David and Linda Chen, who had been trying to have children for 8 years. But here's where the story gets complicated. Margaret wrote that she had tried to stay away, to let me have my new life, but she couldn't. She had been watching me from a distance, learning everything she could about my life. She knew when I took my first steps, when I lost my first tooth, when I graduated high school. She had been my secret grandmother, loving me from the shadows for 18 years before she finally sat down to write this letter. The part that made my hands shake was what she wrote about my real parents, the Chens. According to Margaret, they knew she was watching. Not only did they know, but they had been sending her pictures and updates about my life all along. Christmas cards, school photos, little notes about my achievements. The 3 adults had formed a silent conspiracy of love around me, and I had been living at the center of it without knowing. But Margaret's letter held one more revelation, one that made me question everything I thought I understood about my adoption story. She mentioned that there was something else David and Linda had been keeping from me, something about why my biological mother, Claire, had really given me up. It wasn't just about being young and unmarried. There was another reason, something Margaret called the family burden, that she hoped I would never have to carry. I called in sick to work and spent the day going through every family document I could find. Birth certificates, insurance papers, old photo albums. I was looking for cracks in the story I'd been told my whole life. And I found them. In a box in the basement, tucked behind Christmas decorations, I discovered a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were letters, dozens of them, between my parents and someone with the initials MS Margaret Sullivan. The letters spanned my entire childhood, and as I read them, I realized that the Chens had been writing to Margaret about me for 25 years. The most recent letter was dated just 2 years ago. In it, my father wrote, "Sarah is doing well. The kids are growing so fast. She still doesn't know about Claire's condition and we think it's better that way. Some secrets are meant to protect the people we love. Claire's condition. What condition? I confronted my parents that evening. I'll never forget the look on their faces when I walked into their living room carrying Margaret's letter and the box of correspondence I'd found. My mother's face went completely white. My father sat down heavily in his chair like his legs had given out. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They looked at each other with the kind of silent communication that comes from 40 years of marriage. Finally, my mother spoke. "We were protecting you, Sarah. And we were protecting Claire." "From what?" "From each other," my father said quietly. "Claire didn't just give you up because she was young. She gave you up because she was sick. Mentally ill. Severely bipolar with psychotic episodes. Margaret thought that if you ever tried to find Claire, it might trigger something that could hurt both of you." The room felt like it was spinning. "Is she still alive?" Another long silence. "Yes," my mother whispered. "She's in a care facility in Portland. She has been for most of your life." I spent the next week researching everything I could about Claire Sullivan. My birth mother was now 47 years old and had spent the last 28 years in and out of psychiatric hospitals. According to the records I found, she had never married, never had other children. In her lucid moments, she would ask about the baby she'd given away. The facility where she lived was called Riverside Care Center. I found their website, read their mission statement, looked at photos of the gardens where residents could walk on good days. I wondered if Claire ever walked in those gardens and thought about me. Margaret's letter had included one final request. If I ever decided to meet Claire, I should visit her grave first. Margaret had died 3 years ago, but she was buried in Portland's Mountain View Cemetery. She wanted me to know where she was in case I ever needed to talk to someone who understood what it meant to love someone from a distance. Against every rational thought in my head, I booked a flight to Portland. I told my husband I was visiting an old college friend. I told my children I was going on a business trip. I couldn't explain to anyone, including myself, why I felt compelled to open this door that had been carefully kept closed for 30 years. But some truths have their own gravity. Once you know they exist, they pull at you until you can't resist anymore. The flight to Portland was the longest 2 hours of my life. I kept thinking about Claire in that facility, wondering if she would want to see me, wondering if seeing me might make her condition worse. I thought about my parents who had probably spent 30 years dreading this exact moment. Most of all, I thought about Margaret, who had loved me enough to write a letter that would change everything, but who had waited until she was gone to let it find me. Mountain View Cemetery in Portland is beautiful in a way that makes you understand why people choose to spend eternity there. Rolling hills, old oak trees, and headstones that tell the stories of lives lived and mourned. I found Margaret Sullivan's grave in the section reserved for the 1920s generation. People who had lived through the Depression, World War II, and the moon landing. Her headstone was simple. Margaret Rose Sullivan, 1925 to 2021. Beloved mother and grandmother. Grandmother. There was carved in stone. I sat on the grass next to her grave and told her everything. About finding the letter, about confronting my parents, about the fear and excitement and guilt I felt about being there. I talked to her for an hour, and somehow sitting there in that peaceful place I felt like she was listening. When I finally stood to leave, I noticed something I'd missed before. Next to Margaret's headstone was a smaller one, almost hidden by overgrown grass. I brushed it clean and read, "Baby Sullivan, born and died October 15, 1964. Too precious for earth." Margaret had lost a child. A baby who would have been Claire's older sibling. Suddenly, her intense love for me, the granddaughter she watched from afar, made perfect sense. I wasn't just Claire's daughter to her. I was the continuation of a family line that had been broken by tragedy. The next day I drove to Riverside Care Center. It was exactly like the photos on their website, clean, well-maintained, surrounded by gardens that were beautiful even in late fall. The receptionist was kind but firm about their visitor policies. I couldn't just show up and ask to see a resident. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her daughter," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. That changed everything. Within an hour, I was sitting in the director's office, learning about Claire's condition and what I might expect from a visit. "Claire has good days and difficult days," Dr. Martinez explained. "On her good days, she's articulate, artistic, and deeply thoughtful. On her difficult days she might not recognize you or she might become agitated. We never know which version of Claire we'll meet on any given day. Does she know about me? Does she know I exist? She talks about her baby all the time. It's one of her most consistent memories even during episodes. She's never forgotten that she had a daughter. Dr. Martinez arranged for me to meet Claire in the facility's art room, where she spent most of her time painting. He warned me that I should be prepared for anything, that Claire might be overjoyed, confused, or even hostile. Nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I walked into the art room and saw a woman with graying hair and paint-stained fingers working on a canvas. Even from behind, even after 30 years, I knew it was her. There was something about the way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her head, that looked familiar in a way that went deeper than memory. "Claire," I said softly. She turned around and I was looking into my own eyes. Not similar eyes, my exact eyes, down to the small fleck of gold in the left iris that I'd inherited from no one I'd ever met. "Sarah," she whispered, and the paintbrush fell from her hand. "You came back." Claire and I talked for 3 hours that first day. She was having what the staff called a remarkable day, clear, present, and more articulate than she'd been in months. She told me about the pregnancy, about the decision to give me up, about the regret that had haunted her for 3 decades. But most importantly, she told me the truth that Margaret had hinted at in her letter. The real reason I'd been given up for adoption. "It wasn't just because I was young," Claire said, mixing colors on her palette as she talked. "And it wasn't just because I was sick. It was because of what runs in our family, Sarah. What they were hoping wouldn't be passed down to you. The bipolar disorder?" She shook her head. "Something else. Something that skips generations sometimes, but when it appears." She paused, looking directly at me. "Have you ever known things you shouldn't know? Seen things that others can't see?" My blood went cold. Since childhood, I'd had what I called feelings about people and situations. I could sense when someone was lying, predict when bad things were about to happen, sometimes even dream about events before they occurred. I'd learned to keep these experiences to herself, telling myself they were just intuition or good observation skills. "The women in our family," Claire continued, "were what some people might call psychic. My grandmother could predict deaths in the community. My mother could find lost objects and missing people. I could see glimpses of the future, but it got mixed up with the mental illness and no one could tell what was real and what was delusion." She gestured to her paintings, and for the first time I really looked at them. They weren't abstract art like I'd assumed. They were detailed, realistic scenes: a car accident on a rainy highway, a woman in a blue dress standing in a hospital room, a child playing in a park I didn't recognize. "I paint what I see," Claire said. "These are things that haven't happened yet or things that are happening somewhere else. The doctors think they're hallucinations, but they're not. They're as real as you sitting here." I stared at the painting of the woman in the blue dress and felt my heart stop. It was me. Exactly as I looked right now, standing in a hospital room I'd never seen, holding the hand of someone lying in a bed. "When did you paint this?" I asked. "Last week. I've been dreaming about you coming here, Sarah. But I've also been dreaming about what comes next." She pointed to another canvas, this one showing a funeral service. A small gathering of people around a casket, and in the crowd, a woman who looked like me standing next to 2 children and a man with kind eyes. "Whose funeral?" I whispered. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I dream about Dad, your adoptive father, David. Something's wrong with his heart, Sarah. Something the doctors haven't found yet. But you're going to know. You're going to feel it before anyone else does, and you're going to be able to save him." The room started spinning. 3 days ago, my father had mentioned feeling tired lately, having some chest tightness during his morning walks. He'd brushed it off as getting older, but I'd been having a nagging worry about him that I couldn't explain. "This is why they gave you away," Claire continued. "Not because the gift is bad, but because when it combines with mental illness, it becomes dangerous. You got the gift but not the sickness. You're what our family could have been if the mental illness hadn't interfered." I looked at her paintings again with new understanding. These weren't the products of delusion. They were warnings, glimpses of possible futures that she was trying to capture and understand. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked. "Use it," she said simply. "Help people. Save the ones you can save. And don't be afraid of it the way I was." That evening, I called my father from my hotel room and insisted he go to the emergency room immediately. I couldn't explain why, but I knew, with the same certainty I'd felt about finding Claire, that he needed medical attention right now. He argued, said he felt fine, but something in my voice convinced him. For hours later, he called me back from the cardiac unit at UCSF. They'd found a 95% blockage in his left anterior descending artery, the kind they call the widowmaker because it kills without warning. The doctor said if I'd waited until morning, I probably wouldn't have made it, he told me, his voice shaky with relief and disbelief. How did you know, Sarah? I looked out my hotel window at the Portland skyline and thought about Claire in her art room, painting futures that might come to pass. I had a feeling, I said. When I visited Claire the next day to say goodbye, she was having one of her difficult days. She didn't recognize me and became agitated when I tried to explain who I was. But as I was leaving, she called out, "Tell Margaret I kept my promise. Tell her the baby turned out perfect." I flew home with Margaret's letter in my purse and a new understanding of who I was and where I came from. I also carried with me 3 of Claire's paintings, the ones that showed scenes from my future that hadn't happened yet. The letter that arrived 30 years late hadn't just revealed family secrets. It had revealed family gifts, family responsibilities, and family love that transcended time and distance and even mental illness. Some secrets are kept to protect us. Others are kept until we're strong enough to carry the truth. Margaret Sullivan had timed her letter perfectly, sending it to reach me exactly when I was ready to understand that being different isn't a burden to hide from, it's a gift to be used wisely. And sometimes the families we think we know are just the beginning of the families we're meant to discover. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.